And thank you all for attending this. This is a beautiful day. It just turned out so great. And I'm going to introduce Jay Topping, who is a local historian. He usually spends his time down in Scotts Valley at the Scott House, and he does a lot of things around the community to help. And Jay, why don't you come on up if you're ready? So Jay is has a wealth of history of this area, and he's going to just focus on some of the local history that's relevant to us. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, just want to make sure it's coming across so that when Jay talks, you'll be able to hear him clearly. If you can't hear him, just tell him, point up to tell him to increase the volume, and we'll do that. We'll turn up the sound.
Looking up.
Yeah, keep looking up. Yeah, just don't fall over when you do that, okay? All right. So Jay is really a wealth of information, and you'll have questions at the end of his talk, so you'll get a chance to ask him about this and that and find out what really happened to Charlie, Mountain Charlie, okay? All right. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. It's really nice to see such a great audience. It's kind of a mountain version of, I'm trying to think of the name of it, sorry. Like a little town social. That's what this is like for the mountains, and it's great. We do this in Scotts Valley every year, and we have the National Family Night Out. Have you guys ever participated in that? So it's really nice to see everybody. I brought these placards, I can stand over here, so that kind of fills in with some of the history that I'm talking about today. So I didn't know that I was going to be talking about Mountain Charlie so much as Hiram Scott, because he's my guy. I'm writing a book about Hiram Scott. So I had to go bone up a little bit on my Mountain Charlie history. But I do know, and we know, that Mountain Charlie was born in 1825. He was part of the Royal Navy as a young man and went to Australia and New Zealand. And when the word of the gold rush hit California and spread out, his whole ship of men came to San Francisco, and they all jumped ship. And he went up to the mountains immediately. Tried to do some mining, didn't do real well. So he got the idea, like a lot of men, that they would make more money supplying the miners. Yeah. So we got a little man blowing a whistle, which is maybe it's a little bit distracting. Thanks. So he started making money off that, but he lost his fortune a couple of times, and he was pretty downhearted. And so him and a partner decided they were going to go to Santa Cruz and see what was going on in Santa Cruz. They got up to the Summit Road, real close to the Summit exit, and his partner said, "Ooh, this is scary up here. I don't like this. I'm going on to Santa Cruz." But Charlie liked it. He thought, "Wow, this is wide open space. It's beautiful mountains." So he decided to stay. Now, what he had been is he'd also been a good hunter. And they were finding that bear meat brought a lot of money up in San Francisco. In fact, it was like considered a delicacy. So a lot of people would pay a lot of money for bear meat. So he and a man named Taylor decided that they would do that as their living. And they started hunting all over the mountains and having good success, not only bear, but deer. And he would make 2 trips a week to San Francisco to take his meat up, and also to Alviso. I don't know if anybody knew this, but Alviso was a big major port back in the day. And so the ships would come all the way down to Alviso, and they would take things up to San Francisco. So the story of him and Taylor, I'll go through this a little bit rapidly because we don't have a lot of time. But so when his friend and he were hunting, they saw a mama bear and 2 cubs. And they thought, well, we're in a good position. We'll stay up high. They'll be down low. So they went and positioned themselves on their horses, waiting for the bear to come up. Well, the bear came around behind them out of nowhere. And the bear attacked Mountain Charlie and Taylor. Charlie got off 2 shots from his rifle, but the bear kept coming, didn't stop the bear. So then he takes his rifle and he starts beating the bear over the head with his rifle, breaks the stock off of his rifle, and the bear kept on coming. So you can imagine that would be death to most men. And the bear got a hold of him in his jaws, tore his forearm up, tore the side off of his face, if you can imagine, his jawbone, part of his skull. One eye was ruined. And he fell silent by the tree. Well, I don't know if many people know this about grizzly bears. When they kill something, they don't eat it right away. They'll leave it for later, and they'll come back. So here's Charlie laying there dead, apparently to his partner, and Taylor gets the bears to go away. The dogs they had with them chase the bears off. Taylor goes back, and he sees Charlie sitting beside a tree, leaning against it, but looking dead. But he was sitting up. So Taylor drags him all the way over to here from Summit, which is probably 2 or 3 miles. And Jerry Park will talk about what happened, because his great-great-grandmother attended to Charlie to try to save his life. And he still was alive, amazingly. So she attends to him. They get a doctor to get on a horse. I mean, they get a man to go down to San Jose to get a doctor on a horse. Can you imagine how long that would have taken to get all the way to San Jose and back on horseback? And he lived through that. Crazy. Just, amazing amount of energy and drive that he had and wanting to live, forced to live. Doctor comes back up. They get him sewed up. Mrs. Schultz, Susan Schulteis, kind of just brings him back to where he could breathe and he could sit up. And they go back down to San Jose. They find a piece of Spanish silver that they could hammer out at a blacksmith shop. And they actually hammer out this silver, so we don't know exactly how big a piece, but probably something like that. They bring the silver back up, they sew it to his brain, to his head, and he survives. Unbelievably. He was, for weeks he was recuperating, but he did survive. I mean, we know that he went on to have a family of about 11, 12 kids later on. He lived into his 70s. So he had an amazing determination to live through this. So one other quick part of that, a few months later, I'm kind of hazy on that detail, but he started having tremendous headaches. Tremendous, just his head was pounding. So they got the doctors back up here. They undid the silver plate from his brain, from his head, and found out that his hair had been growing ingrown into the cavity of the hole. So can you imagine? And that's what was giving him the extreme pressure on his head. So they were able to sear the hair and put the plate back on, and he survived. And many, many years later, he starts this toll road where I come in with Hiram Scott. He and Hiram Scott were paid to put in this road over from Alviso through San Jose, Los Gatos, Summit Road, Scotts Valley, Santa Cruz. It had only been an Indian trail. And if you get a chance afterwards, this explains that a little more about the trail. It was a treacherous trail. It was through steep ravines. There was lots of landslides. The Indians could navigate it themselves, but to try to build a road, that was almost unheard of. But they did it. Hiram Scott and Mountain Charlie were able to make this road. And they had a toll gate right at Summit where Mountain Charlie's place was, and then a second toll gate in Scotts Valley. Has anybody ever visited the 1853 Scott House in Scotts Valley? Some of you have, but most of you haven't. That's open for tours during the summertime. And you can see where Hiram Scott lived. The house is amazing. Built out of redwood. They didn't have doors or windows being made in California when he built it. So he had to have all that brought from the East Coast So we still have doorknobs and glass and windows that are from New York that were brought here to that house. It's pretty amazing. So the reason for the toll gates, of course, was these men worked hard and they had to constantly work to maintain this road. It was constantly having, especially through winter storms, terrible things would happen. So they would have to maintain it. So the way that they got paid for 20 years, the county said, we'll let you operate the toll roads, you get paid, and that will be your pay. So Hiram made his off his toll gate, Charlie made his off of his toll gate. Now, another thing that would happen at the toll gates, the climb was very, very steep up to the mountains. So when a stage would leave Santa Cruz, they would have 4 horses. When it got to Hiram's toll gate, they would add 2 more horses. And that was to give them the extra horsepower to get over the hill. And when they would get up to Mountain Charlie's, they would take those 2 horses back off. And then it would be reversed. So over the years after that, the road kept getting improved. Hiram went on to other things. Mountain Charlie maintained his toll gate. He built a hotel, kind of a primitive hotel, and he had his own cabin. But the stages would stop there, and one of the things that people always said was if there was kids on the stage, Mountain Charlie would pick up his hat and show them his lack of his eyeball, and the kids would just laugh and scream and all that kind of stuff. So he liked having fun with that. So we'll also talk about Hiram, after he was doing the roads for a while, he owned all of Scotts Valley. He owned 13,000 acres that was from an original Spanish land grant. So you can imagine all of where Scotts Valley Drive is, Bean Creek, the next hill over, and all the way to Zayante, almost to Felton, was what Hiram owned. He was a very, very wealthy man. He made his money up in the mines. And he worked with a Captain Weber who founded Stockton. And still, if you go up to Placerville, on the freeway, you'll cross over Weber Creek. That's where they all got very, very rich. So, pretty cool as far as that goes. But Hiram and his buddies, when they're crossing the San Joaquin River, where the freeway crosses over it now, Mossdale Landing, they thought the miners having a really tough time getting over this river right now, especially in the spring. They said, we come from boat building families, let's build a ferry. Well, the money that they made off the ferry eclipsed anything they'd made at the mines. $700 to $1,100 per day, 7 days a week. You can imagine that? That's $1,853. They had money to burn. And that's when Hiram came back and bought Scotts Valley. And if you go up the coast, you'll see Scott Creek on Highway 1. Hiram also owned that ranch up there. So he was doing really well. But Hiram always had his mining in his blood. He couldn't get it out of his blood. So here he's doing really well. He owns this valley. He's brought his family out from Maine. They're all doing well in their enterprises. He's farming. He's selling potatoes to the miners and making a killing on that. And so you'd think he'd just be happy to settle down. Well, he does settle down a little bit. He marries a lady that came out from Canada, and he settles down for a little while. And then all of a sudden, gold fever, silver fever gets a hold of him. And he forms a mining company and goes all the way up to, if anybody's been over at Ebbets Pass, Highway 4, to the other side is Markleyville. He goes over there and becomes part of a new silver city. Well, in 9 years, he lost every dime in 9 years. And he brought his poor wife over to this little town. No churches, no schools. It was really a rough town of about 3,000 people. If you go by it today, there's a wooden marker. That's all there is Silver Mountain City. So Hiram had to come back to Santa Cruz. He still owed money at the mines. He'd sold his whole property of Scotts Valley for about half of what it was worth because he needed the money. So he had to come back to Santa Cruz and work for his brother-in-law. So he said, well, I guess I'll do what I know how to do. So he started building more roads with other people. And he also operated a stagecoach line with Mountain Charlie. There's another book out there, if you're interested in those stagecoach lines. There's a book by George Colgrove. If you try to remember that name, you can get the books at the Santa Cruz Library. Talks about the years of running the stagecoaches over the mountain through Mountain Charlie's. Lots of good stories about that. So finally, the trains come, and that's what we talk about in these parts here. Once the trains come in the 1870s, people aren't so interested in taking a stagecoach anymore. And that's why George Colgrove had a hard time making a living by the end of it. And the men that were building the railroad said, George and Hiram and you guys that are running stagecoaches, that's a thing of the past. The train is the future. So finally, they kind of decided that they would do that. I give another lecture about 3 young men that came over on the first trains to Santa Cruz. Does anybody know about those 3 young men? They were princes. So there was 3 young Hawaiian princes, and I'm going to go off on a tangent, but there was 3 young princes that came to Santa Cruz because they were getting schooling in San Mateo. They had an aunt in Santa Cruz. They get down there on one of the first trains that came over the mountains, and they said, hey, we surf, and there's surf here. So they had redwood boards made for them in the mountains. These boards were 16 feet long. Some of them weighed 100 to 150 pounds. And those 3 princes surfed the river mouth, and they made Santa Cruz Surf City, USA. So don't let anybody in Huntington Beach or Southern California try to tell you they're Surf City. We have the 3 young princes to prove it. So a lot of cool histories happened over here. I don't know how I am for timing. Jerry's going to be speaking about the Schulteis family. I hope I gave you kind of a little, I hit the tops of the waves of history. We couldn't go too deep, but so thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate it. Thanks.